Hey guys, welcome back to another fun-filled day of science. It's me, Mr. Lewis, your teacher, coming back to you live with another video. This is Chapter 1, Section 2, Scientific Methods. Here's our bell ringer over here, so make sure you go ahead and answer your bell ringer there on Edmodo and get that taken care of for us. So here we go. Our objectives today is to identify the steps used in the scientific method. Next, we're going to be able to formulate a testable hypothesis. And lastly, we'll be able to explain how scientific methods are used to answer questions and solve problems. In the last lesson, you guys learned about scientists and different scientific jobs. Today, you're going to learn about how those scientists actually solve the problems that they have, the questions that they have about whatever it is that they're questioning about. Whether it's volcanoes, whether it's the weather, whether it's a propulsion system of boats, whatever it happens to be, we're going to find out how scientists what methods the scientists actually use to go ahead and solve those problems. So, as is already stated up there on the board, you can see what the scientific methods are. This is the way in which scientists answer their questions. All right. Now they always are looking for answers, and those of us who are always asking questions are always looking for answers, and that's what scientists do. And we discover that over time they follow certain steps, and these steps usually are the same steps, but they don't have to be followed in order. So here we go. The first thing that they do is they typically ask a question. So you'll start off and you'll look around and you'll see something, you'll ask a question. All right. After you ask that question, you have two routes you can go. You can either go over here to observations or you go over here and form a hypothesis, whichever way you decide to go. Well, in this, we're just going to follow the diagram so that the diagram makes sense to you there on the screen. So we'll follow the diagram first. And here it says, goes from asking a question to forming a hypothesis. So the next step would be to form that actual hypothesis. So they look at the question and they actually decide that they're going to find how they can test an answer. Now, when we talk about hypotheses are always testable. It's not just some wild off-the-wall question that they have. It's actually a testable answer or testable question so that they can focus their investigation. Now, after they form the hypothesis, they have two routes they can go. They can either make observations or they can actually go down here and start testing the hypothesis, whichever route they decide to go. If they decide to make observations, that's typically because the science is already out there or information is already out there for them to go ahead and solve problems. All right. Or if there isn't any information out there, then they're going to go ahead and test the hypothesis. All right. Once they get done testing the hypothesis, they are then going to come over here and analyze the results. Now, when they analyze the results, they have different ways they can go from here as well. They can decide that, hey, I need to make some more observations, and so they can come back up here and make some more observations, or they can decide that they're going to draw conclusions and go from here. So when they draw conclusions, it actually goes from here. They have two questions. They can answer yes or no. Did the results from their investigation, did the results actually support their hypothesis? If it did, then congratulations, they're done. They communicate the results and they're heroes to the world. If not, they have to come over here to no. And then guess what? It starts that process all the way back over, all over again, so they can come up with an answer. Or they may just simply say, okay, we've done enough testing. Here's our results. This is what we found. Leave to somebody else. Now, science always starts with a question. That's the biggest thing to understand, that all science always starts with a question. Now, like we talked about the other day, it starts off with us, with something that pertains to us, and then it eventually goes to the world around us, and eventually the world beyond, into the cosmos and stuff. Now, as they ask these questions, the purpose of that is to help focus the investigation, to give us a reason why we are doing the investigation. Next step would be to make observations, and those observations, they use their senses. They can use data that was already found from other research. They can do all kinds of things. They can use things like meter sticks and stopwatches. But the important thing about the observations is that they are very accurate, that they're not using bias if they can avoid it. They're not using bias, but they need to make sure they make very careful and accurate observations. All right, that way they have the success rate of their investigations will be very high. Okay, so scientists come up with real world questions. They're not just looking at hypothetical. They're trying to come up with real world answers. All right. The scientists that look at developing technology for us are called engineers. Now, these engineers are the ones who put use science for practical purposes, whatever it happens to be, how to make a car safer, how to make a boat go better through the water, more efficiently through the water, how to make an airplane fly longer, those types of things. Those are things that engineers do to create. That's what the things that engineers create. Now, we're going to talk about two gentlemen. We're going to talk about Mr. Zarnowski and Mr. Triantafylou. Now, both of these gentlemen are engineers at MIT. One is a professor and one is a graduate student. And they decided to look at the efficiency of boat propulsion systems specifically, to see what they can do to create a boat, to make a boat go more efficiently through the water. Now, when we talk about efficiency, what it is it compares the energy output with the energy input. That simply means they use the energy used to move the boat forward and the energy supplied by the motor. So they look at those two different things to see what they can do to make those things better. And they were shocked to learn that the boat propellers were not very efficient. As a matter of fact, they're only about 70% efficient at getting a boat through the water. All right, which is amazing, because when you look at boat propulsion system, it's been around for over 100 years. Why hasn't anybody ever tried to change it? So this is the question they had. This is what they decided to try and come up with and try to create. Now, why is it important? Well, simply because if we don't get a boat through the water efficiently, you're wasting fuel and you're wasting money. All right. We try to save fuel. Now, they're not looking more at your John boats that you take out into Ramsey's Lake or into the waterworks to go fishing, or even into Nickajack. They're not looking at that. What they're looking more at is these super cruise ships. They're looking at these ocean transport, these big ocean liners that transport materials between the continents and stuff, because those things waste thousands upon thousands upon thousands of pounds of fuel every year and millions of dollars. So trying to find a way to make those things more efficient so they don't waste as much of our natural resources. So here was the question they asked: how can boat propulsion systems be made more efficient? Well, the next step was for them to form a hypothesis. Now remember that a hypothesis has to be testable. If it's not testable, it's not a good hypothesis. Now that doesn't mean that you can't have a hypothesis not testable, but to come up with a good hypothesis, it has to be testable. Otherwise, how do you know whether it was supported, the experiment supports it or not? So these gentlemen start researching, start looking around, see what was the most efficient swimmer that was out there. And they discovered that a penguin was the most efficient swimmer out there. So they decided to create their model or their propulsion system based off of a penguin and how a penguin swims. So basically the flappers. So they made predictions. Now, these predictions are what will happen. They make a prediction to see what will happen when they actually test their hypothesis. All right, and typically those predictions are written in if-then statements. So here is their prediction: if two flippers are attached to a boat, then it will be more efficient. Notice we have if and we have then. That's what they mean by an if-then statement. Next, they have to test their hypothesis, and so they actually start off with computer testing to come up with something. And then when they discovered that the flapper system on a computer made a boat more efficient, they decided to create a model, a working model, to see if they got the same results. So they created a controlled experiment. So when we talk about a controlled experiment, what we're talking about is an experiment that changes one variable at a time to make sure that one variable is what caused the change. All right. So a variable, in case you don't know, in math, in science, it's a little bit different than math. A variable is the fact that it's changed in the experimental group. Now, there's two types of variables. You have the independent variable and you have the dependent variable. The independent variable is the variable that's changed. The dependent variable is the one that stays the same. So you have to have that in your testing. So they created this Proteus, which is a flapper boat. After they create it, they have to test it. Once they test it, they gather all the data. They carefully record all their data to make sure that they have the right information they need for their experiment. Now, they need to make sure that the sample data is large enough that it makes sense. You can't just test it one time. You can't test it 5 times. You got to test it many times to make sure that they continually get the same result. Over here, you can see this was the data right here that it came up with, that the propeller-driven boat was only 70% efficient. But when they did the flapper boat, which was Proteus, when they did that, they discovered it was 17% more efficient. 87% efficient, getting that boat through the water using the flapper system. So they decided that really shocked them. That made them so excited. All right. So at the end, they drew the conclusion that, hey, guess what? A flapper system on a boat is very, very efficient. And they were shocked about that. They said, man, this is awesome, because now we can get these boats to go through the water more efficiently. Now, this is a real quick video just so you guys see what we're actually been talking about.
A hypothesis is a theory or explanation that is based on observations and that can be tested. Two engineers named James Sarnowski and Michael Triantafilou had a question. How could they build a better boat propulsion system? A propulsion system is what makes a boat move. Most boats are driven by propellers. Sarnowski observed penguins swimming at the New England Aquarium. His observations led to the hypothesis that a boat propulsion system that mimics the way a penguin swims will be more efficient than propulsion systems that use propellers. The engineers built a boat called Proteus with flipper-like paddles that moved out and then in, much as a penguin uses its flippers underwater. Their tests proved that their hypothesis was correct. Proteus is 17% more efficient than a propeller-driven boat.
All right. So as you saw, that was pretty shocking stuff. They were amazed at that. So what's the next step after they do that? They have to communicate the results. So they have to tell the world, hey, guess what? This thing worked. What we decided, what we thought about works. All right. So Sarnowski and Triantafilou, they published in academic papers. They have their project on display. They even put it on the internet. So if you decide to go out and you decide to search Proteus, you could find out the experiment that they did, and you could test it too if you wanted to. Guess what? It's review time, it's time for the review. The way scientists solve problems is called the scientific methods. And following in no particular order, we have questions. First thing to do is ask a question which focuses our investigation. They make observations. They form our hypothesis or make sure our hypothesis is testable. They test the hypothesis to prove or disprove whether the hypothesis was correct. They record their data. They analyze the results. They draw their conclusions, and they communicate the results to let others know that how their test went. And guess what? It was a success. So if you have any questions, make sure you stop, pause, rewind. You can always check me out again to see if there was a part that you didn't really understand. And remember that I'll be seeing you in the future.